It was supposed to be just another quiet evening on the ranch, one of those tasks so routine it barely registered in memory. Savannah Walker, a rugged and capable rancher, had driven out into the wide Texas expanse to move cattle across her family's land. She'd done it countless times, knowing every turn, every rock, every stretch of dry earth. But this time, she never returned. For nearly a decade, her absence became a haunting silence that stretched across the Walker ranch like an echo trapped in time. No trace of her, no signs of her pickup truck, just a piercing void that consumed her father, Thomas, and hollowed out the rhythm of their lives. 9 long years passed like a desert wind, dry, harsh, and unforgiving. Then, one blistering afternoon, deep in the remote reaches of the Texas desert, the sound of metal against stone rang out beneath the earth. A crew drilling for oil hit something unexpected, something buried, something old. When they hoisted it out of the ground, coated in layers of time and dust, it wasn't just steel they'd unearthed. They cracked open a mystery that had refused to die. The sun was merciless that day, casting jagged shadows over the rusted tin roofs and sun-baked earth of the Walker Ranch. In the equipment shed, Thomas Walker, now 62, every wrinkle carved by worry and sun, was bent over the engine of his aging John Deere. Grease clung to his hands, like the memory of a daughter he could never forget. Fixing machinery had become his therapy, a way to stay busy, to stay sane. He was tightening a stubborn belt when he heard it, the crunch of tires on gravel. That sound had once brought hope. Now, it brought dread. He straightened up, squinting through the sunlit haze at the patrol car heading toward the house. Wiping his hands on an old rag, he felt a wave of unease. Law enforcement hadn't come calling in years. Not since the hope had dried up like a riverbed in August. Deputy Martinez stepped out, his face as somber as a funeral hymn. Another officer, younger, unfamiliar, followed. Thomas sensed it immediately. This wasn't a routine check-in. "What brings you out here?" Thomas asked, the rag still twisting in his calloused hands. Martinez removed his hat, a small gesture with a weight that crashed through Thomas like a hammer. "We found something," the deputy said softly. "We think it's the truck Savannah was driving, the night she disappeared." Thomas blinked, the words landing like thunder in a still room. "After all these years?" he rasped, his voice caught between disbelief and offense. "Where? At the bottom of the Rio Grande?" But Martinez didn't flinch. "No, sir. It was buried out in the desert, just outside of Terralingua." "Buried?" Thomas echoed. His mind tried to reject it. "You're telling me someone buried a whole damn truck?" The younger officer spoke up. An oil crew was prepping a site, hit something metallic. It was her truck. Thomas stood frozen, the rag falling from his hand. The idea was absurd. And yet, the officer's eyes were graves of certainty. This was real. He barely registered the words as they asked him to come confirm it. He nodded numbly, his heart a maelstrom of disbelief and dread. Calling out to his foreman, Manuel, who came jogging over with concern, Thomas simply said, "They found her truck." His voice was barely above a whisper. The ride out to the site was long, silent, and heavy with memories. Every mile of desert they passed seemed to echo Savannah's name. By the time they reached the drilling site outside Terlingua, a swarm of vehicles and flashing lights dotted the flat, endless landscape. Yellow tape marked a perimeter, and at the center of it all was a pickup truck. Caked in red dirt, rust curling around its edges like dried blood, it hung suspended from a crane, pulled from the depths of a forgotten place. Beneath it yawned a dark hole in the earth. A grave not just for a truck, but perhaps for the truth. Thomas stepped out of the car, his knees trembling beneath him. The wind carried the scent of oil, metal, and something deeper, soft, Detective Rodriguez, from the early days of the case, stepped forward. Time had etched new lines into his face, but the sadness was the same. "Mr. Walker," he said gently, offering a hand. Thomas shook it, barely feeling it. Rodriguez led him to a man in a hard hat, Jim Patterson from Perry and Drilling. "This site," Patterson began, "was flagged as inactive since the 60s, but this morning my crew found something off. A boulder placed right on top of the old wellhead, not capped, just hidden." Thomas's breath caught. Someone hadn't just buried the truck. They'd gone to lengths to erase it. And in that moment, Thomas realized this wasn't just about Savannah's truck. This was the beginning of a story much darker than anyone had dared to imagine. Thomas stood in silence, trying to listen, trying to process. Jim Patterson's voice was steady, but Thomas heard only fragments. The word boulder, the phrase 15 feet down. His eyes, however, never left the truck. Even after 9 long years underground, it had emerged from the earth like a frozen memory, remarkably intact, preserved not by time or mercy, but by the desert's dry air. It should have been dust. Instead, it stood as a ghost, silent and stubborn, refusing to vanish. "We ran ground-penetrating radar," Patterson explained, "but the old drilling hardware on site must have thrown off the scans. We had no idea anything was buried there." Thomas nodded slowly, jaw tight, eyes sharp. "So when you hit something—" The drill operator stopped immediately, Patterson said. He knew something wasn't right. This wasn't rock or clay. We had to excavate manually. Took 3 hours. Then we saw it was a vehicle and we called it in. I mean, who dumps a truck in a well unless they're trying to erase it? The wind stirred as Thomas stepped closer, the dirt crunching under his boots. The pickup was cloaked in layers of rust and dust, its front windshield shattered where the drill had punched through. The moment felt surreal, like opening a casket that never should have been sealed. "She didn't drive here," Thomas muttered, voice tight. "Savannah never came this way. This isn't anywhere near her normal route." Rodriguez nodded. "We know. This was deliberate. Whoever did this wanted the truck gone, hidden so deep no one would ever find it." Thomas's pulse pounded as he asked to see what they'd recovered. Rodriguez led him to a nearby tent, set up like a makeshift crime lab. Inside, a folding table stood under harsh lamplight, displaying a spread of evidence bags. Thomas's breath caught. Her turquoise snap leather wallet, a worn hair tie, still threaded with strands of her long dark hair, her silver cross necklace, his late wife's. Each item screamed of her presence. Each one stabbed him anew. "She always wore this," he whispered, pointing to the necklace. Said it reminded her of her mama. His fingers brushed another bag. A multi-tool. "That's mine. Gave it to her for emergencies." He pointed again. "That tire gauge, too. Told her to always keep it in the glove box." Before emotion could overtake him, a commotion erupted at the site entrance. A black SUV rolled in fast, kicking up a halo of dust. Sheriff Clayton Ridge stepped out, brushing his hat back as he surveyed the scene. "Sorry I'm late," he said, approaching with short breath. "Highway 118, 3-car pileup." "It's okay," Rodriguez said. Sheriff Ridge turned to Thomas, his expression laced with genuine sorrow. "Tomas, I'm so sorry. We've looked for her for nearly a decade. Finding this, it's something at least." Thomas forced himself to stay composed. "It's a start, but my daughter's still gone. This truck doesn't explain whether she's dead or alive. It doesn't tell us why or how." He turned to Rodriguez. "What about DNA, fibers, anything that can give us more than just memories?" Rodriguez nodded. "We've collected everything. Hair strands, possible blood traces from the seat, fingerprints if any survived the years. The lab needs time, a few days, minimum. As if the moment couldn't fracture further, Patterson approached the sheriff again. Can we resume drilling operations around the site? We've got contracts to meet. No, the sheriff said, voice hard. Not anymore. This is a crime scene. We're expanding the perimeter. Full excavation teams coming in. Rodriguez checked his phone. I've got to get back to the station, start pulling case files with fresh eyes. He looked to the sheriff. Can you take Mr. Walker home? Ridge agreed, and Thomas climbed into the SUV, casting one last glance at the pickup. The metal coffin of 9 years of silence. The drive back was quiet. The same desert landscape flew past, but it looked different now. Colder, more distant. At the ranch, Ridge parked near the house and turned off the engine. Can we talk in your office? He asked gently. I need to go over some details. Thomas nodded, leading him through the ranch house. The back office was simple. A desk buried in paperwork, filing cabinets lined with bills and cattle records. But it was the photo above the desk that drew Ridge's eyes. The image of Savannah on her horse, wind in her hair, laughing like she owned the world. The sheriff sat, flipping open a notepad. I need you to walk me through that night again, he said, from the beginning. Thomas sighed. I've told this story 100 times. I know, but we have to revisit every detail now. Leaning back, Thomas clasped his hands tightly. She left the ranch around 8, headed west to move cattle. Usual routine. That drive takes about 45 minutes. She liked going in the evenings. Less trouble with neighbors who shared the watering holes. The sheriff nodded, scribbling. I stayed behind to finish accounts. When it hit 11 and she wasn't back, I went to check. I found the cattle still there, untouched. No sign of her or the truck. He swallowed hard. I wasn't worried at first. She was strong, smart, 28 years old. I figured maybe her truck broke down. Maybe she caught a ride or decided to camp. His voice cracked. But she didn't come back. And the next morning, when she still wasn't here, that's when I called. His eyes welled and he looked away. I've lived with that decision ever since. If I'd called sooner. The sheriff made notes, his expression unreadable. You said you went to bed after checking the land. What time? Midnight. And you were alone? No staff on site? Me live off property, just me. The sheriff leaned forward, his tone changing. Where exactly were you between 8 and 11? Thomas frowned. Here. In my office. Why? Can anyone confirm that? What is this? Thomas's voice sharpened. Why are you asking that? The sheriff's voice remained calm but firmer. We have to examine every possibility. In cases like these, family members are often involved. Fury bloomed in Thomas's chest. You think I hurt my own daughter? I didn't say that, but that's what you're implying. I'm saying we investigate all angles. I was here from 8 until 11, then I went out, spent an hour looking, came back. That's it? You think I buried a truck in the desert overnight, at 62, without tracks, without anyone seeing? The sheriff scribbled something else. What about your crew? Thomas slammed his palm on the desk. You're accusing my entire ranch now? I just want to re-interview them. With all due respect, Sheriff, this is a waste of time. You want answers? Start pulling traffic camera footage from Terlingua. Look for big rigs, excavation gear, anything large enough to dig that hole. That's where your answers are. The sheriff hesitated, then shook his head. Not yet. We'll coordinate with Terlingua PD first. My job, Thomas, the sheriff had said. Thomas stood abruptly, rage quietly igniting behind his eyes. From where I'm sitting, he snapped, it looks like you're more interested in accusing me than finding who buried that truck. The sheriff rose too, slowly closing his notebook. His voice was clipped. I'm following protocol. Then follow it somewhere useful, Thomas barked. Pull the traffic footage. Question the oil company. Find out who knew that old well even existed. That's what an investigator should do. Without waiting for a response, Tomas marched toward the door. We're done here, he growled. Next time you want to talk, bring Rodriguez. I'm not going through this circus alone again. He didn't look back as he walked the sheriff out of his house. There were no handshakes, no forced politeness, just silence and dust as the sheriff climbed into his SUV and drove away. Thomas stood there for a long moment, fists clenched at his sides, watching the road like it might return something it had stolen. It was all wrong. After 9 years of empty leads and desperate prayers, they finally had something real, and instead of digging deeper, Sheriff Ridge was trying to dig into him. The man whose daughter vanished without a trace was now under suspicion. The absurdity of it made Thomas's stomach churn. He turned and glanced through the window at the clock. 4:00 p.m. The sun had started to droop in the sky, casting long shadows and filling the air with a heat that stuck to his skin. His throat was dry. He hadn't eaten since breakfast. The ache in his stomach reminded him he was still human, even if the last few hours had felt like a waking nightmare. In the shed, Manuel was arranging tools when Thomas called out, "I'm heading into town." Manuel looked up, concerned. "Everything all right, boss? Just need to clear my head. I'll be back later." Minutes later, Thomas was driving down the dusty road, a dry laugh escaping his lips as he replayed the sheriff's words, accusing his ranch hands of helping him bury his own daughter's truck. The sheer lunacy of it reignited his anger. 15 minutes later, he pulled into the gravel lot of the Dusty Spur Tavern. It was early, so only a few vehicles were scattered around. The bar opened precisely at 4, a ritual for tired ranchers and oil hands finishing their shifts. Inside, the air conditioning hit him like salvation. He slid onto a stool and gave Jake, the longtime bartender, a nod. "Whiskey neat, and whatever sandwich you've got ready," he said. Jake nodded and glanced up at the television, which played footage from the drilling site. The truck. Jake began softly. "I saw the news. Is that really?" "Don't ask," Thomas cut in. "I just need to breathe for a second." Jake, understanding, switched the channel to a sports recap, but a voice from a booth in the back groaned in protest. "Hey, I was watching that." "Sorry about that," Jake mumbled to Thomas, trying to avoid a scene. The man from the booth stood and approached the bar, seating himself a stool over. He looked mid-40s, dust-covered like he'd been on the road for days. His eyes darted back to the now-changed screen, still irritated. Connor studied him a moment, sensing something. Curiosity, or maybe something heavier. Finally, he broke the silence. "You from around here?" "Don't think I've seen you before." The man turned, grateful someone had spoken. "No, just got in from New Mexico." He extended his hand. "Barry Granger." "Thomas Walker." They shook. "What brings you to Alpine?" "Looking for my brother." "Terry Granger? He was a cop here, or used to be." Thomas blinked. "Terry? Traffic enforcement Terry? That's him. You know him?" Thomas' stomach dropped. "We worked together briefly. He helped during Savannah's case." Barry's face shifted instantly. "Oh, God, that truck. Was that your daughter's? I'm so sorry. I didn't realize." "It's all right," Thomas said quietly. "But you said you can't find Terry." Barry's frustration surfaced again. "He vanished. Quit the force 9 years ago. No one at the department can tell me where he went." Thomas narrowed his eyes. 9 years ago, he echoed. "That's when Savannah disappeared." "I've been told he moved to Mexico," Barry added, confused. "But he never told me, didn't say goodbye. It's like he just vanished." Thomas leaned back, piecing it together. Terry had been one of the officers who pulled highway footage during the early investigation. Then he left, without warning. "You think he might have known something?" Tomas asked. "I don't know," Barry admitted. "We weren't close. Not after our parents died. But I'm trying to fix things now. Reconnect. Except I can't even find him." "You're not burdening me," Thomas said, finishing his drink. "You're looking for answers. So am I." Jake dropped off the check, but Barry quickly grabbed it. "Least I can do." Thomas stood. "You got a car?" "No. Took a cab from my motel." "Come with me. The station's not far. Maybe Rodriguez knows something about Terry." Barry looked like someone had handed him a lifeline. "Thank you. Really." They stepped out into the afternoon heat, the sun falling heavy on their backs. As they climbed into Thomas's truck, a thought clung to him like sweat. Terry's sudden departure and Savannah's disappearance were too closely timed to be coincidence. The Alpine Police Department was a squat brick building, built in the 70s, aged but sturdy. Thomas pulled into a visitor's spot and noticed the station was more alive than it had been earlier. Inside, they were greeted by Officer Patricia Hernandez, a familiar face Thomas had known since her rookie days. "Back again, Mr. Walker?" she asked, her smile tight. "Looking for Rodriguez," Thomas said. "Is he around?" "Hames stepped out about an hour ago." "Want me to call him?" Thomas nodded toward Barry. "This is Barry Granger. He's looking for his brother Terry." Patricia's expression changed. "Ah, yes. You came in yesterday. I told you, we don't have any forwarding information. He left 9 years ago. No one seems to know where he went." "I was hoping someone might know more," Barry said, trying to stay hopeful. "If anyone knows," Patricia added, "it's Rodriguez or Sheriff Ridge. They were here when he left." Thomas grimaced slightly. "Is the sheriff in?" "Eh?" "Just pulled in," she said, pointing out the window. They stepped outside to intercept him. His SUV rolled into the lot and parked near Thomas's truck, but he didn't get out. Through the tinted windows, they could see Ridge, head bowed, on a call. Thomas lingered near his own truck, pretending to retrieve his charger. As he passed behind the sheriff's vehicle, the windows cracked for air. A breeze carried the sheriff's voice. Thomas hadn't meant to listen, but what he heard stopped him cold. The late afternoon air hung heavy and still in the parking lot. Voices carried easily in the quiet, and Thomas couldn't help but catch the sheriff's low, tense words from the cracked window of his SUV. "Handle it quickly," Ridge was saying, his tone sharp. "Clipped. Bones, yes. Find bones." And Thomas stiffened, hand fumbling over his keys as he tried to pretend he hadn't heard. His rational mind jumped to conclusions. Maybe it was a separate investigation. Maybe this had nothing to do with Savannah. After all, the sheriff had a county's worth of cases under his belt. Still, something in the way the word bones hung in the air. It chilled him. "No, I'm not leaving town." "Okay, fine." The sheriff's voice paused as another voice, thinner, younger, came through the SUV's speaker, just barely audible in the summer hush. Thomas felt a stab of discomfort. The sheriff likely didn't realize how clearly sound carried from his vehicle. He made a mental note to discreetly mention it another time, for privacy's sake. He opened his truck door, reaching in for the charger tangled in the center console. But just as he was about to return to Barry, another phrase floated from the SUV. "Not Terry Granger. No one cares. New guy in the office, yes." Thomas froze, mid-mount, heart beginning to pound. Terry Granger? Why would Sheriff Ridge be talking about Barry's brother, a man who'd supposedly vanished nearly a decade ago, especially now? Suddenly, the sheriff's engine revved to life. The SUV backed out with mechanical ease, gravel crunching beneath its tires. Barry came jogging up, his brow furrowed. Was that the sheriff? He's leaving again? Thomas didn't answer at first, his thoughts racing too fast for words. The overheard fragments, the urgent tone, the mention of bones, the casual dismissal of Terry Granger, none of it made sense. "Get in the truck," Thomas said sharply. "What? Why?" Barry's confusion deepened. "I think I just heard something I wasn't supposed to. Just get in." To his credit, Barry didn't argue. They both jumped into Tomas's truck, and he started the engine just in time to catch the sheriff's SUV turning onto the main road. Barry leaned toward him, his voice low. "What did you hear?" Thomas's hands tightened on the wheel. "Your brother's name." The sheriff was talking about Terry. Said no one cares about him. Barry paled. "What else?" "Something about bones, and to handle it quickly." It wasn't a routine call. It felt like something was happening now. Thomas's voice hardened. "Barry, I don't like this. Your brother vanished the same year my daughter did. Now Ridge accuses me of hiding Savannah. And he's making secret calls about Terry. This smells wrong." They drove in tense silence, shadows stretching long across the fading Texas road. Thomas kept his distance, tracking the SUV while blending in with sparse evening traffic. "He's speeding," Barry murmured, eyes fixed on the sheriff's taillights. "He's in a hurry." "Not just a hurry," Thomas said. "He's trying to beat someone there, or hide something before we, or anyone else, can see it." He pulled out his phone, dialing Ridge's number with one hand on the wheel. A moment later, he saw the sheriff glance at his phone and set it down. The call went to voicemail. "Tom is ignoring me." Barry leaned forward. "Try Detective Rodriguez." Thomas hit the contact and switched to speaker. "Thomas," the detective answered quickly. "I assume this is about the drilling?" "No," Thomas interrupted. "Something else. Do you remember Officer Terry Granger?" A pause. "Terry?" "Yes, moved to Mexico 8 years ago. Sudden departure?" Barry leaned in. "Detective Rodriguez, this is Barry Granger. I'm Terry's brother. I've been looking for him, came to Alpine to find answers, but no one knows where he went. It doesn't make sense." Rodriguez's voice was cautious. "That's what we were told. He left to follow a new path, said he needed a change." "No," Barry said firmly. "He loved his job. He wore that badge like it was part of his soul. He wouldn't just walk away." "Why is this coming up now?" Rodriguez asked. Tom explained everything. His argument with the sheriff, the suspicious timing, and most importantly, what he'd just overheard in the parking lot. "We're following him now," Tomas said. "Something's not right." "You're following Sheriff Ridge." Rodriguez's tone spiked. "That's risky. You should—" "He's turning," Barry cut in. The sheriff's SUV veered off the main road onto a dusty path that led toward a deteriorating farmhouse, just barely visible through the thickening dusk. "I'll call you back," Thomas said and ended the call. He slowed and pulled off the road about 100 yards past the driveway, hiding his truck behind a sparse line of mesquite trees. He killed the engine. The silence was thick with tension. "What are we doing?" Barry whispered. "Watching." The farmhouse was barely more than a silhouette now, but lights inside flickered to life. Thomas spotted vehicles. 3 total. The sheriff's SUV had parked halfway up the drive. Then, another car approached. "Look," Barry pointed. 3, maybe 4 figures exited the second car. They moved with purpose, going to the back door and dragging out a person, bound, stumbling, clearly restrained. "Jesus," Barry muttered. "Are they blindfolded?" Thomas narrowed his eyes, straining to make out details in the dim light, but the shape of the figure was unmistakable. Someone who couldn't walk freely, someone being controlled. The group loaded the person into the sheriff's SUV. Ridge never even left his vehicle. "What the hell is happening?" Barry's voice cracked. The sheriff's vehicle started down the road again, heading in the same direction they'd been going before. The second car turned around, heading back toward town. "Call Rodriguez," Thomas said, his voice steel. Barry was already on it. "Detective, we just saw the sheriff take custody of someone," Thomas said the moment Rodriguez answered. "They were restrained, possibly kidnapped. He put them in the trunk of his SUV." Rodriguez's tone turned cold. "Thomas, are you absolutely sure?" "Two of us saw it," Thomas replied. "You can doubt one man's eyes, not two." "I saw it too," Barry added. "No question, someone was transferred into Ridge's SUV." Rodriguez didn't hesitate. "If that's true, I'm issuing a bolo. All units will be alerted to stop the sheriff's vehicle." "Do it," Thomas said. "Just do it quietly." "I'll try," Rodriguez replied. "But if someone at dispatch is loyal to Ridge, it might leak. Still, the alert will stand. He'll be stopped. I'll handle this personally." "Good," Tomas said, ending the call. He hit the gas. "If that person in Ridge's trunk is Savannah, or your brother," his voice broke off, "I'm not letting him disappear again." Darkness crept across the Texas horizon as they tailed the sheriff deeper into the countryside. Rodriguez's voice stayed on speaker, dispatching officers, coordinating roadblocks. "He's heading for the county exit," Thomas reported. But before they could act, the sheriff's brake lights flared, and the SUV abruptly turned off the highway onto another winding dirt path. "He's changing direction," Barry said urgently. Rodriguez sighed. "Someone at the station tipped him off." "Keep following him," Rodriguez said firmly through the crackling line. "But stay back, maintain distance." For the next 10 minutes, Thomas and Barry trailed the sheriff deeper into the Texas wilderness, the roads thinning to nothing but cracked gravel and creeping mesquite. The terrain grew more rugged, more forgotten. Eventually, the sheriff's SUV slowed and turned onto an overgrown dirt road, barely wide enough for one vehicle. It led to what looked like a long-abandoned ranch, faded buildings silhouetted against the last light of dusk. The main house, several outbuildings, and a collapsed stable stood like relics of a past long left behind. "Detective," Thomas said into the phone. "He's pulled into the old Hartley place. It's been deserted for years." "We've got units en route," Rodriguez replied. "Do not approach. I repeat, stay back." Thomas obeyed. Barely. He pulled his truck off the road about 200 yards from the entrance, using a patch of brush for cover. From their hidden vantage point, they watched as Ridge's SUV came to a stop near one of the old stable buildings. Under the faint light of a handheld flashlight, the sheriff climbed out and moved to the rear of his vehicle. He struggled with someone, a bound figure, motionless and slumped. It was impossible to tell if they were unconscious or barely clinging to awareness. The sheriff dragged them toward the dark stable entrance, half carrying, half pulling their limp body into the shadows. "I have to get closer," Thomas said suddenly, reaching for the door. Barry grabbed his arm. "No, this is as far as we go. You heard Rodriguez." "That could be Savannah," Thomas whispered. "That could be my little girl." "Or it could be a trap," Barry warned. "Please, we've come this far. Don't do something that gets you shot before you know for sure." Thomas's fists clenched so tight his knuckles turned white. But he didn't move. He stayed in the truck. The minutes crawled by like hours. Occasionally beams of flashlight light sliced through the slats in the stable walls. There were shadows moving, shuffling, searching. And then, like phantoms, vehicles appeared silently out of the dark. No lights, no sirens, just the presence of authority moving like a tide. Officers emerged from the night, flanking the property with practiced precision. "They're here," Barry breathed. Thomas and Barry stepped out, hearts pounding. An officer immediately approached, holding up a hand. "Stay here, gentlemen, for your safety." But from within the stable, muffled cries rang out. Female, ragged, terrified. "Go, go, go!" someone shouted. Officers stormed the building. Gunmetal chaos followed. Shouts, a struggle, commands barked in every direction. Thomas couldn't hold back anymore. He moved forward, Barry right beside him. And then, out of the stable's maw, emerged Sheriff Ridge, handcuffed, face twisted in fury. When his eyes locked with Thomas's, venom dripped from his voice. "You'll regret this, Walker," he spat. "You just signed your own." "Shut up," an officer barked, shoving him toward a patrol car. Moments later, another officer stepped from the SUV, holding a phone. "Detective Rodriguez needs to see this," he called. "The sheriff's messages. He was coordinating moving the woman out of town, and something about bone." Rodriguez arrived just as the messages were handed over. He scrolled, his face darkening. "You want to explain this, Ridge?" he asked. "Because this doesn't look like you were working alone." The sheriff's lips stayed tight. He said nothing. Barry stepped forward. "We know where he made the transfer, an old farmhouse off Highway 67. That's where we saw it happen." Thomas pulled up the GPS on his phone. "Here. Exact spot." The chaos of the moment halted as officers emerged from the stable, supporting a woman between them. Even in the flickering ambulance lights, even after all these years, Thomas knew. "Savannah," he breathed. She was gaunt, filthy, barely able to stand, but she was alive. The medics rushed her to the waiting ambulance. An IV was already in her arm. When she saw Thomas, her body jolted to life. She tried to rise and nearly fell, but Thomas was there, catching her. She collapsed into his arms, sobbing uncontrollably. "Dad, Dad, I knew you'd find me. I knew you'd never stop." One medic spoke softly. "She's been drugged. Likely sedatives, but she's lucid. Barely. She needs to be in a hospital now." Rodriguez stood by, notebook in hand, but Savannah turned toward him, eyes raw with emotion. "The sheriff? He didn't kill me because he wanted to keep me. For himself." Her voice cracked. "He said I was leverage. Said I was his toy." Thomas's rage exploded inside, but he kept it buried. "For her." "Who else was involved?" Rodriguez asked, voice steady. Savannah nodded weakly. "Drug traffickers. Miguel Salazar's crew. They kept me locked underground, in a bunker, hidden beneath a silo at the farmhouse." "The sheriff protected them?" Rodriguez asked. "Yes," she whispered. "He made evidence vanish. They paid him every month. In return, they let me live." Rodriguez snapped his notebook shut. "We'll bring them all down." Another officer ran over, phone in hand. "Detective, someone just sent coordinates. Says that's where they're burying the bones." Rodriguez's face went pale with resolve. "Dispatch," he said into his radio. "I need a tactical team on those coordinates immediately, and more units at the farmhouse. We're dealing with a full-scale trafficking ring, and possibly a grave site." Barry stepped forward. "I'm going with you. My brother, he might be there." "I understand," the officer said, looking to Rodriguez, who shook his head. "You can't go. This is a combat raid now. If Terry's there, we'll find him, and we'll bring him back." Barry nodded, swallowing hard. "I hope you don't. I hope he really is in Mexico." But Thomas barely heard. He was already moving with the medics, climbing into the ambulance beside his daughter. He handed Barry the keys to his truck. "Take it. I'm going with her." As the doors slammed shut and the ambulance sped off, Thomas took Savannah's trembling hand and whispered everything. The discovery of her truck, the sheriff's betrayal, Barry, the chase, the fight to bring her home. She squeezed his hand. "When I'm better, I'll tell them everything," she whispered. "I'll help you make him pay." At Alpine General Hospital, the chaos gave way to sterile stillness. Savannah was rushed into treatment. Thomas, finally still, sat in the hard plastic chair of the waiting room, the sterile smell clawing at his nerves. 9 years. 9 years of not knowing. 9 years of grief wrapped in lies. Now that grief was changing, morphing into fury, into resolve, into something that wouldn't sleep until everyone responsible was brought to justice. He stood suddenly, needing air, needing space. Outside, under the quiet stars, he pulled out a crumpled pack of cigarettes from his coat, a habit long buried, now unearthed by pain. As he lit one with shaking hands, a voice called out from behind, "Mr. Walker." He turned, the flame flickering in the breeze, and in the doorway stood a young officer, expression urgent. "You found something else?" Thomas turned toward the voice. A man in surgical scrubs was approaching, his face composed, but his eyes carried the gravity of what he was about to say. "I'm Dr. Chin," he introduced, gently. "I've been overseeing your daughter's care." Thomas instinctively flicked his cigarette away and stepped forward. "How is she?" The doctor's expression was measured, but Thomas could see the fire burning beneath his professionalism. Anger, sorrow, a weariness born of seeing too much. "Physically, she's stable," Dr. Chin began, "but malnourished, severely underweight. She has signs of long-term physical trauma. Multiple old fractures that never healed properly, scarring consistent with restraints. She's also suffering from several infections, including STIs and respiratory complications, likely from chemical exposure. From what we've gathered, she was kept in a silo where narcotics were stored." Thomas's knees nearly buckled. He gripped the wall for support, fighting a wave of nausea and rage. "We've started treatment," the doctor continued quickly, sensing the shift in Thomas's breathing. "She's responding, but she'll need to remain under hospital care for at least a week, possibly more." "Can I see her?" Thomas asked, voice hoarse. "Of course. She's in room 314. She's been asking for you." Dr. Chin led him through the fluorescent-lit maze of hospital corridors. As they reached the door, he paused. "Mr. Walker, I've seen a lot of trauma in my career, but what your daughter's endured, this will take time. Her recovery won't just be physical. You'll need to be patient. She's going to need her father more than ever." Thomas nodded, his voice trapped behind the lump in his throat. Then he stepped into the room. Savannah looked impossibly small in the hospital bed. The IV glinted under sterile lighting. Machines beeped softly, tracking each heartbeat, each breath. But her eyes, those familiar, fierce eyes, lit up when they found him. "Dad," she whispered, a fragile smile curling through her tears. He rushed to her side, grabbing the chair and pulling it close. "I'm here, sweetheart." "I'm sorry," she murmured, her voice breaking. "I'm so sorry I didn't come home." "No," he said, gripping her delicate hand with both of his. "Don't apologize. You have nothing to be sorry for. I should have known something was wrong. I thought maybe you went camping, maybe ran into town. I never imagined." "Stop," she said, her voice gaining strength. "Don't blame yourself. If anyone's to blame, it's Ridge. He wore that badge like a weapon. He used it to hurt people. You tried, Dad. You never gave up." Just then, a quiet knock broke the moment. A young officer stepped into the room. "Sorry to intrude. Detective Rodriguez asked me to take Miss Walker's statement." Thomas stood up, the protector rising again. "With all due respect, officer, given what happened with the sheriff, we'd prefer to wait for Rodriguez himself." The officer nodded, respectful. "Understood. I'll notify them." Several hours passed. Thomas dozed lightly in the chair, eyes opening every time Savannah stirred. Finally, close to midnight, Rodriguez entered. He looked exhausted, but his eyes were laser-focused, determined. Behind him was another officer with a recording kit. "I'm sorry for the delay," Rodriguez said. "We've been making arrests all night, but I'm here now." Savannah pushed herself up in bed. "I'm ready to tell you everything." Her voice was steady, filled with resolve, and so she spoke. About that night, about seeing the drug transfer near the old well pad, about running for her truck and being ambushed. She described Miguel Salazar, the blackout pursuit, being ripped from her cab and bound. "Called someone," she said. "Kept saying, 'Sheriff, we have a problem.' That's when I knew Ridge was involved." Thomas sat frozen, his hands fists in his lap. "They argued. Miguel wanted to kill me. Ridge said no. Said I was his insurance, his plaything. He'd covered for them for years. They owed him. He demanded they keep me alive." "So they did." She described the bunker beneath the silo, the sedatives, the nurse who had tried to show kindness and was murdered for it, and how the sheriff had instructed them to bury the truck in the old well. Rodriguez listened, stone-faced. "Your story matches what Salazar confessed tonight. The sheriff manipulated traffic footage, altered logs. We even found the excavation crew he used." "What about Terry Granger?" Thomas asked. Rodriguez sighed heavily. "We found him, alive. He's been imprisoned at the farmhouse, forced to work in their drug labs. He has whip scars, broken bones, disfigured hands. But he's alive. Barry's with him now." Savannah closed her eyes, tears escaping silently. "There's more," Rodriguez said, pulling out his phone. "We intercepted Salazar's men tonight. They were burying fake remains, pig bones dressed in women's clothing. Boots like your daughter's. They were going to make us believe Savannah had died, close the case, disappear her forever." The room went silent, the weight of how close they had come to losing everything crashing down. Later, after Savannah gave her full statement, Thomas sat beside her as she drifted into a deeper sleep. The beeping of the monitors was the only sound. He stepped into the hallway and leaned against the wall, trying to absorb it all. Barry approached quietly. He looked worn down to the bone, but lighter somehow. "Thomas," he said, extending his hand, "I owe you everything. If we hadn't crossed paths, if you hadn't overheard Ridge, I'd never have found Terry." Thomas took the handshake, gripping it firmly. "He's alive. That's what matters." 8 years of hell," Barry whispered. "But he made it." Rodriguez had told Barry everything, the pig bones, the fake death plan, the trafficking ring. They had stopped it in time. "We'll fight this," Thomas said quietly. "Make sure Ridge and every last one of them goes down." Barry nodded. "The state's coming in, full audit of the department, every inch of it. No more secrets." They stood together, side by side, in that sterile corridor. Two ordinary men who refused to give up. Men who had seen evil dressed in uniforms and masks of authority, but had clawed back the truth. "Thank you," Barry said again, "for not giving up, for trusting your instincts." Thomas looked back toward Savannah's door. "A father doesn't give up on his daughter," he said softly, "and a brother doesn't give up on his brother." Barry smiled, eyes glassy. No, they don't. And in the end, that truth, that unwavering love, was stronger than fear, corruption, or the darkness of any secret. It was what saved them all. Not justice alone, but the kind of love that burns through even the longest night. And now, together, they would see it through to the very end. Justice wasn't a hope anymore. It was a promise,